So welcome to Angular for Java developers. How many of you have built applications with Angular before? Let's start with Angular JS, so Angular 1. Okay, Angular 2, 4, 5 or higher? Okay, good. So, my name is Bert Schrijver. I work at OpenValue, which is a small Java startup at the center of the country. But since the startup world is so hard, I need to work 2 jobs. So I also work at JPoint, where I do Java consulting for various clients. I currently work at the Dutch National Police, where I learn most of my Angular experience. I also do some stuff for the Analjug every now and then. So the next, let's hope it fits in 50 minutes. I'm going to start with a short introduction. I'll tell you all about Angular. Then there'll be live coding. I'll demo the coding, and there'll be more live coding and more demos and more live coding. And probably there isn't time for questions, but you're free to reach out to me afterwards during drinks. So why I'm a Java guy. Why am I talking about Angular? I've spent a fair amount of time with it over the past 2 years, and I must admit that I quite liked it. So I started working with the early 2.x betas, and currently the Angular 6 release, which was released somewhat 2 weeks ago, I think. Well, I quite enjoyed it. And I would say it's the ideal front-end framework for Java developers. But why? Well, because of reasons. It is component-based, so you heavily get pushed into thinking in components and modularity. So there's also modules. It has dependency injection, which is awesome if you're accustomed to dependency injection from the Java world. There's TypeScript. How many of you have worked with TypeScript before? Okay, so TypeScript is basically JavaScript done right from the eyes of a Java developer. So with TypeScript compiles to JavaScript, so it just, or actually transpiles, so it just emits plain JavaScript. But with TypeScript, you get typing and generics and inheritance and classes and interfaces. It's just like, you know, like things should be from my point of view. It has rxjs, which is the JavaScript implementation of the reactive extensions, which is completely similar to rxjava. How many of you have worked with rxjava before? Okay, a couple. Which is a nice set of tools to handle asynchronicity, which happens every now and then in a front-end application whenever you're calling the backend, for example. It has a template engine because you generate HTML templates, and there's model binding. So you write your let's say your business logic in TypeScript, and then there's automatic binding to variables in your HTML, which is similar to what you would do with JSPs or JSF or Wicked or any server-side rendering front-end frameworks. And it has a powerful CLI that you can use to generate and update your applications. So let me first give you a view on the JavaScript world through the goggles of a Java developer. So I'm going to name a couple of things, and then first make you shout what we use for this in the Java world, and then what we use for this in the Angular world. So how many of you are Java developers? Okay, good guess. So what do you use for dependency management to pull in dependencies and packages in the Java world? Just shout. Maven, yeah. So in Angular we have npm, which is the node package manager. What do we do to build and package our stuff into jars? Maven. So in Angular we have, well, there's lots of tools, but in the Angular world it's Webpack. So Webpack is a one-stop shop to go from TypeScript code to a packaged and minified bundle, basically a tar, gz, or a zip that you can unzip to your web server. Where do we fetch our libraries from? Maven Central. Well, you're going 3 for 3 so far, so very well. In the Angular world we have npm.js.org. How do we describe our project? POM file. Package JSON in the Angular world. So the package JSON is a JSON file that says, I want this version of this library. What do we program in? Kotlin. Ah, you got wrong now. Yeah, Java, whatever runs on a JVM. Point taken. And if you're patient, even Scala. But in Angular, we program. Well, you can use JavaScript, but none of the cool kids use JavaScript in Angular. So forget it. You can use TypeScript and obviously HTML. What do we run on? JVM, yeah. So, well, in Angular, it runs in the browser, obviously. And some stuff that needs to run on your machine runs on Node.js. Node.js is basically some engine for running JavaScript on a terminal. So, what do we use to generate our apps in the Java world? Ooh, this is a difficult one. So imagine me being here with a bow tie, cool hip glasses, and a glass of, I don't know, vodka. Hipster, yes. So in Angular, we have the Angular CLI, which you can use to, well, I'm going to demo how you can generate an entire app. What do you do unit test? JUnit, yes. So in Angular, we have, well, there are multiple frameworks, but the ones that are most commonly used are Karma and Jasmine, which you can use to run basically tests on your code. Responsive layouts. Responsive layouts. If we were building, I don't know, a front-end application with server-side rendering, what we use? Bootstrap, right? That's like CSS for Java developers, if you don't know CSS like me. So in the Angular world, you can use whatever you like. Bootstrap or a Material Design. Material Design is from Google and integrates fairly well with the newer Angular versions. So you can even generate and scaffold some components that are directly styled in Material Design. So they have a uniform look and they are fast, performant, and also responsive. What do we use for reactive programming? rxjava. What do we use in Angular world? Yes, kijk, you're learning it. What do we do to test stuff in the browser? Yeah, Selenium, WebDriver, basically the same. In the Angular world, pretty much the same. Protractor is a layer on top of WebDriver, where you can have specific selectors that hook into the Angular model. What do you do to check our code style and for bugs and stuff like that? Sonar, yeah. So in the Angular world, well, obviously Sonar, but also there are some tools like TS-lint that can lint your code and even make automatic fixes. So I'll publish the slides on Twitter afterwards. So you're free to take pictures, but you can also just wait until they're online. So what do we use for version control, build automation, artifact repository, code quality metrics? I'm going to fill this one in for you. Stuff like Git, Jenkins, Nexus, Sonar, or maybe Artifactory or SVN, or hopefully nobody uses CVS anymore. I'm not going to embarrass anyone by asking. In the Angular world, pretty much the same. You can use whatever you like. Basically, a pipeline is a set of shell commands that go from source control to a running application anywhere. You can do this with the same stack in the Angular world. So let's code. I have 43 minutes left, which should work, but it might not. So, are you ready? Yes. This might go a bit fast, but that's the only way that I can fit it in the little amount of time that I have. So let's get started. I'm going to start by generating a new app. And actually, this can take a while because it needs to do an npm install, which can take a couple of minutes. Didn't want to keep you waiting. So I generated a new app before this talk. To prove that I just did this, I executed the date command before. So yeah, you see, this is like 35 minutes ago. So what I did is I used the Angular CLI, which you just can install and then execute. And with the Angular CLI, you can do all sorts of stuff. This is basically the entry point to your application as developer. So I generated a new application, and then it did an npm install to pull in all the packages, of which 13 have security vulnerabilities, but we're going to skip about this for now. Let's look at what it generated. So this is the basic, well, let's say, directory tree from an Angular application. And there's an E2E folder, which contains end-to-end tests. So there's some configuration. Here's a page object file, which is basically like a wrapper around the Selenium commands or protractor commands to get to a page. And then there's an end-to-end spec file that tells protractor to navigate to a page and to verify some text. There's a node modules folder, which if I remove this folder, my laptop loses about 3 kilograms of weight. So this is typically fairly big. I'm not going to go into there now. There's a source folder. In the app folder, there's my application component. I'll demo it in a bit. It's fairly small. There are some assets in there, for example, images that you want to serve. Some environment definitions that can either set the app in development mode or production mode. Some debugging stuff. There's a list of supported browsers. There's a favorite icon with the Angular logo. There's the index.html, which is fairly simple. It will just define stuff like the viewport, and then it will say app root, and app root matches to my app component. There's a Karma config for the unit testing, a main TypeScript file that kind of bootstraps the Angular app and tells it to go to the app module, which I'll show in a bit. There are some polyfills for all the browsers that don't support modern browser stuff. Some CSS where probably nothing is in. Some setup for the tests. And then tsconfig is the setup for the TypeScript compiler. So you can tell it here which files to include and exclude, if it needs to compile to ECMAScript 2015 or ECMAScript 6 or whatever, basically whatever your TypeScript compilation outputs. And there's the linter config that will assert interesting stuff like component selectors must be in kebab case, whichever that means, probably stuff on a stick. There's another config file, git ignore, and then the Angular JSON is basically the blueprint for your application. So this is generated, and it says stuff here like, all right, so you're using this to build it, the output is here, the index and the main file is this, there are polyfills, there's some configs, some assets, and whenever you do something with your application, like add new components or upgrade, then this is the source that the Angular CLI uses to generate stuff for you. There's the package JSON, your POM. It has some scripts and some dependencies that are included in the eventual package. And there are some dev dependencies that are only available for local development. For example, Karma, the unit test stuff. You don't need to include this in your production package. tsconfig, this is the generic tsconfig, and these were specific for the application and for the tests. And tslim, we already saw that. So let's fire up the application. So you can go to demo app, ng-serve, and then the Angular CLI will start compiling it, and it will start listening at localhost 4200. And there we should see our app. There it is. So if we now go to the app component, then you can see how the automatic reloading and stuff works. So if I can, yes, get my fingers on the right spot. App component. So there's a TypeScript. A component basically has a couple of files. It has a module definition, and the module definition basically says, this is a module, and I'm exporting these components. I'm importing stuff from these modules, fairly similar to Java modules. There's a CSS file for style. There's a spec.ts file. Spec files are tests, so this is the test definition. There's an app component, and the component is the component definition. And this is basically the entry point for your component. So it's saying add component, and then some metadata. The selector is app root, so if I ever want to include this in, for example, my index.html, I can activate the component from here, so I can jump in there. The template is the HTML, the style URLs are the CSS, and here's a variable that has the value app. And if I change this, for example, app2, then the app automatically reloads, and we can now see the model binding in action, because in the HTML file, it's saying welcome to title between curly braces. So let's clean up a bit. So you can just use variables in your TypeScript code, define variables in your TypeScript code, and then use them in your HTML code. So let's take a look at how the tests run. ng-test, and this will compile the application and then start a Karma test suite executing all the .spec.ts files. So it's now firing up a Chrome browser to run the test. You can also run this in headless browsers like Phantom.js. So it's saying the test failed because welcome to app should be welcome to demo app. All right, so is this a problem in the test or a problem in our application? Well, the application says welcome to app. So let's fix it in the app component because it should be demo app. And then take another look at our tests. Now another test is failing. It's saying expecting demo app to equal app. So if you go to the spec file, there are a couple of, so this is the setup. You need to configure some stuff for your test bed, basically importing all the dependencies you have. So it's here saying it should create the app. So it's creating the component, the app component, and then getting a reference to that and expecting the reference to be defined. Then it's saying it should have title app, but it shouldn't have title app. It should be demo app, right? So let's fix this. So here it is again creating a component instance and then expecting the title to equal demo app. So let's see, we still have one failed test. Maybe I need to save it to run another run. Yes, so now we have 3 specs, 0 failures. So now we have a running test suite. And you see that this is automatically watching my, my test code. So you can just type, save, and then it will rerun the test suite. So what else do we have? We can run the Endtoend suite. If my tests stop, yes they do. Endtoend, and this will compile the application, start it up, and then launch a browser, and through the Selenium WebDriver API, control the browser to execute my test scripts. So it has now started up my application. It's now going to fire up a browser and test the application, downloading the Chrome driver, testing it, and now it failed because it's saying, hey, I expected that welcome to demo app equals welcome to app. So let's go to the end-to-end test script. So here we are expecting the paragraph text to equal welcome to app, but this is demo app, right? Because we renamed it. Let's try again. How's the pace so far? Anyone think I'm going too slow? So the test succeeded, and obviously these are trivial tests, but you can create lots of these tests to test your entire app. Just like the Java world, I would advise you to focus on creating unit tests and only do some smoke testing with the end-to-end suite, because they're more work to build, they're brittler, and harder to maintain. And then I can lint my application, which will basically perform style checks. Are you using single quotes instead of double quotes? Are you using kebab case? And all the stuff. So typically, you have this somewhere in your development lifecycle, have this embedded. Definitely when you're building it on your CI server, but this can help you in, for example, getting a coherent code style over multiple developers. Okay, so we fixed some stuff. Let's get this out of the way and just commit it. Fix tests. And now I'm going to add Angular material, which is like a UI library. So everything that's probably not too readable on the left is also on my GitHub page. You can just go ahead and reread that later. I'm going to add Angular material. So now I'm saying ng CLI, add the package Angular material to my application. And this will automatically add some dependencies and even update some of my source code. So let's see what it did. So it updated my Angular JSON, saying that there's now some style activated. And it's saying, well, it's basically the same thing here. I guess that's about it. It has updated my app module to include the browser animations module, which is a module that activates some animations for UI material. In the index HTML, there's some nice links to material icons and Roboto fonts. And in my package JSON, Angular material was added, and Angular CDK was added, which is something that's being used by material. And in the styles, it gave my body a margin of 0. But this was all generated. So during the install, it's warning me that Angular material requires a peer, well, whatever. I need to tell it to add Angular CDK to keep my peer dependencies happy. So now we have material added, but it's not doing anything yet because it's just sitting there and we haven't activated the style yet. So we've seen these changes. Let's get them out of the way. And now I'm going to add navigation to my application. So it's still sitting and running here. Most useful application ever. It's not even running. This was the previous version. So let me fire it up. And now I'm going to generate a navigation component, which is a component provided by Angular Material. And the navigation component has schematics. And schematics are basically like instructions on what you should do to add this component to your application. So we have the application running here. If I now add the ng-generate material nav, and the name is navigation, then the Angular CLI adds the navigation component. So what did it do? Let's add these to Git. So it updated the app module to include some of the Angular material libraries, and then it added a bunch of HTML and CSS files. So let's go over them, because I know that I want to clean them up a bit. Navigation, that's the thing with generating. It's never exactly what you want. So the CSS, there's some CSS in there about how the site navigation should look. If you take a look at the navigation component, well, this should be kebab cased and prefixed with app, right? So let's fix that. And then here's some stuff that's for using this component on both a handset and a desktop device. In this case, I'm only interested in desktop just to keep it a bit simple. I can optimize the imports just like you would do in your Java code, and then they're optimized. And now it's complaining that TSLint is saying that, well, your quote marks aren't set up correctly, which is a per project setting, which I need to update in order to make TSLint happy. So this is TypeScript. Let's see. Use single quotes always, because single quotes save space, right? They're less screen real estate. So the component is now pretty clean. Let's go into the HTML. So all this int is hand stat set stuff here, I don't need it. Let's clean this up a bit. The mode I think should be push if I remember correctly. Opened is not default open, so I'm saying false. And here's an ngIf. ngIf is basically an if statement on a template that this button will only be available when you're on a handset, which I also do not want, so let's do it like this. So what you see here is stuff like model binding. So you can bind attributes of components to stuff from your model. So this used to be bound to a model. Now I'm just binding it to a string. Let's see if we can add this component to our HTML. So the selector is app navigation. So if we go to the app component, where now the home stuff is, we can say app navigation. If I get to type this correctly. And now we should have, yeah, we have some navigation. If I click here, then it's not working correctly, because the way that the material navigation works is all the content should be inside the site nav content part of the application. So if I jump in here and then jump to the HTML, I'm here in the mod site nav content, so mod stands for material. And if I add the code there, then now the menu works and it gets nicely pushed aside. It's not exactly the way that I wanted it. I think it should be maybe side or open. I always forget. Yeah, this is nice, right? It pushes it aside a bit. So let's commit this. So we can see the changes at navigation. Yes, let's just shout by adding it, whatever. Now I want to get this out of the way because I don't want this stupid HTML. I want this nice moved into a component. So I'm now going to generate a component. Let's call it the home component, which is generated and added to the app module. It's a fairly simple component. Probably there's almost nothing in there. Let's take a look. CSS, which is empty, a spec file, let's skip that, TypeScript file, which has some lifecycle hook, so on init gets called whenever your application or your component inits, but I can get rid of all this because I don't need it. Clean it up a bit, and then the HTML, well, the implement shouldn't be there, obviously. The HTML is just home works, so let's see if home works. You're saying you're working, let's find out. First, let me show the app, because now the home stuff is gone. So if I say app home here, then it should be back. Yeah, home works, but now I want to put my nice HTML in here. So let's get this out of the way. So now, welcome to title displays welcome to, because title isn't in my home component. So can I say title string is demo app, almost, right? So now it's saying, oh, right, you don't need this string here because it's trivially inferred from a string literal, like we all saw. So let's just remove it. Title is demo app. Then we have our same situation back. So I'm not sure if you can see this, but there's a gray background and it stops here. Is this visible on the screen? Okay, good, because it isn't visible on my screen. I was just guessing where it was. I wanted to make this a bit cleaner. So let's go to the app component and I have no idea how HTML and CSS works, but typically you say something like div class is container, right? Always in container, because containers are cool, stuff like Docker and such, which makes no sense here. So I have a class called container, and I'm saying, okay, the height is, I don't know, 100% of the viewport height. And is it now filling all the page? You have to just believe me on my green eyes that it is. So we've now generated the home component, moved the HTML there, and fixed the layout a bit. So let's commit this. Move home page to home component. And now I want to add routing to my application, because now it has a menu, but the menu is not doing anything. It's just one page. So I'm going to add routing, and I think I need to do this by hand. Yeah, I think I actually accidentally locked my machine, because I have this touch bar, and because I want to lock my machine quickly, there's a lock icon on a touch bar, and I sometimes touch it by accident. You seeing me again? Yeah. All right, routing. So if I go to the app module, you can define your routes wherever you like, but I like to put them here. So let's say const app routes, and this is of type array of route, and this is an array. So I can import route here from the Angular router. And how do I define a route? Let's go in there. It should have a path and a component. Okay, so the path form, the root path from application in the URL is an empty path, so path, empty path, component, home component. Now I need to activate these routes, and I happen to know that you need the router module.forRoute, and then the app routes, and this is just the way that you tell the router module that it should load these routes. So now if I go to the navigation component, and if I remove the app home here, then it's gone. And then I can add a router outlet here, and then it's back, because the route is now slash, so now it gets routed to the home component. But the good thing is now we can add different stuff to our routes. And all it took was just to, let's see, do some stuff to the main module. So what I also need to do is change the links, because the links in the menu, because these were just href, old-fashioned links. When you want the router to understand these links, they need to be router link. So router link is, I don't know, empty path, and then I'm going to call this home, and I'm going to add some other links in a bit. So let's commit this. Add routing. And now to demonstrate how the routing works, I'm just going to add a simple component that's being provided by Angular Material, which is a dashboard, basically a grid. So if you want to define a responsive grid for something like a dashboard, you can use the Angular Material dashboard. So I'm generating it, and this will add a dashboard component. And dashboard component, I'm not going to look into this in detail, but this contains some TypeScript code and some HTML to generate a grid. So let's add the dashboard component to the routes. So let's put this on dashboard, and then the component is dashboard component. And then I also need to add this in the navigation HTML to add it to the menu. So router link is dashboard, if I can type it correctly. Dashboard. And let's get rid of these. Okay, so we now have our app here, and I can click on dashboard, display a dashboard. It's nice and responsive, some nice cards here. And I can click back and forth between home and dashboard. So that's how routing works. We're not going to do anything with the dashboard, but it's just to demonstrate the routing. Add dashboard. Who's still with me? Most of you, luckily. Okay, great. And otherwise, there's drinks in somewhat like 30 minutes or so 20 even. What are we going to do next? So now we're going to make actually a useful application. So I want to transform this application into the official JSpring schedule application, because it's ultimately useful for you after my talk is done to see which talks are next, which are 0 talks. So let's update the application title. This is probably in my navigation component. Let's see. There it is. JSpring 2018 schedule. And now I want to display them into a table so that you can page through them. And there's a nice schematic from Angular Material where I can just generate something like a data table. Here we go. So it's still not doing anything until I activate it. So I'm going to activate it in the same way as I did with the grid. So we go to the, so this is what I added. I'm going to show these in more detail in a bit. So go to the app module, add a route for the talks component, talks component. And then the same thing for the navigation, add a link to it. Talks. So let's see if it works. Talks, and there's a table here. But it's a fairly long table, doesn't really fit on the screen too well, so let's see how this is built. We have a table component. Talks component, because it is going to display talks. There's some CSS, which is, actually there's no CSS at all. There's a spec file, which is the test. There's a component, and what the component does is defining a selector that doesn't conform to my TS-lint settings. It's saying, all right, the talks component has two viewChild. So viewChild is a reference to a component that's a child of the HTML of this component. So this way, you can, if you have a child component in your HTML, you can interact with the TypeScript code of this component in this way. That's a viewChild. So we have some columns that are displayed in the table, ID and name. And we are, when the component inits, we are instantiating a new talks data source and feeding the paginator and the sorting in there, because this is necessary to respond to data. Then we have the HTML file, and what this is doing is saying, okay, so we have a table, it's linked to the data source. We have an ID column, which has a sorting, and it has the ID field. We have a name column, which is basically much the same. This is the style of header rows, this is the style of regular rows, and there's a paginator in here. And we can set the page size to 10, for example, which would make the page a bit shorter, and say, okay, the options for page size here are maybe 5, 10, and 15. Okay, so now we have the table fits a bit better to the screen. So you can go back and forth and sort. If I click it, yeah. So then there's a data source, which is basically providing all the data to the table. And this has defined an interface. It's called an interface in TypeScript, but this could be comparable, just a domain class in Java. There's example data with a lot of data that's being displayed here. And then in a data source, there's a connect method. And the connect method returns an observable that you use to interact with the data source. So in this case, this observable, an observable is comparable to a future, for example, or a completable future. And we're saying, okay, combine, create the dummy data and turn it into an observable. Then get all the event stream from the paginator, get all the event stream from sorting, and then merge those three, connect it to fetching of the data and to sorting it. Not going to go in depth here, but this is kind of chaining all these events from data updates and sorting and paging together. And that's almost all that this component does. So this is now working, but still with stubbed data. So I'm going to commit this and then show you the backend that we're going to talk to. Add talks with mocked data. Okay. So I wanted to live code a Spring application for you too, but when I was timing this, it didn't really work out. So This is like whenever you, for example, if you look at a recording of a concert or a song festival, it sometimes says in the title, recorded live, the live opgenomen, which always was strange to me, because if it's recorded, then is it live or not? So this was, I promise you that this application was live coded, only just you weren't there when I did it, right? So what we have here is a domain object for a talk. So a talk has an ID, a name, a list of speakers. A speaker has a name. That's all I'm interested in a speaker. We have a talk service, and the talk service builds a list of talks in memory. So an ID, all the names of the talks, and the speakers. And some talks have multiple speakers, so the speakers is a list. The service returns a list of talks, and then we have an endpoint which listens on /talks and returns the lists of talks. So let's see if this works. Localhost 8080 talks. There we go. So this is the response. So a talk has a name and a list of speakers and an ID. So now I want to connect my front-end application to this endpoint. The first I'm going to do is to generate a service, because the service is the abstraction for talking to a REST endpoint, for example. So this service is the talks service. There's a test generated and service. And the service, there's some craft here that I don't really know what it is, but I typically remove this and then the application still works. So that's top class engineering. The talk service needs to have a method get talks, and this is a function, and this returns a observable, because it's asynchronous, of type. So what's the type? I think an array of talks or something like that. But we don't have this object yet. So there was something defined in the data source, and this is called a talks item, I believe, which is, I find a strange name, so let's rename this to talk. And because we want modularity and stuff, and we like to put stuff in separate classes, I'm going to move this away in a separate file, which I call talk.ts. New file. Yes, put it in there. And then in my talks data source, just import this. So I'm using the exact same shortcuts as that I'm using when I'm writing Java code. So a talk also has a list of speakers, right? So let's just copy this. Speaker. Yes, you can go to Git. Speaker. Speaker has a name, and then a talk has a list of speakers. Speakers. Array speaker. Okay. So now probably the data source doesn't work anymore, because it's now saying, hey, you're missing the speaker part. It's not assignable because the speaker is mandatory. So what we can do is say, okay, this is an optional parameter. And now the code here compiles, but still doesn't make sense because I don't have a speaker named Hydrogen, last time I checked. So now I can continue implementing the service. So get talks returns an observable of an array of talks, and you can discuss whether this should be an observable of an array of talks or an observable of talk that builds a stream, but that's a whole other conversation. So what I'm going to do here is use the Angular HTTP client. So I want to inject this into the talks service. So I can say HTTP, HTTP client. So this is where the Angular injection comes into place. So and I can say this.http.get, and then the path is, sorry, single quotes, HTTP localhost 8080/talks. Yeah, that's why it was red, right? There we go. Thank you for the tip. One applause for my helper over there. I now need to return the result of the HTTP call, and this returns an observable, and I can even type it here. So I'm saying this returns a list of talks. So now I need to replace the dummy data in the data source with the result of this call. So first I need to grab an instance of the talks service here, which you can do by using injection. private talk service, import it. Okay. So now I can use the talk service in my data source in the connect. So now I'm saying here, let's create a variable called talks, and this is an observable of type array of talks. Is this.talkService.getTalks. Okay, and now I can replace the dummy data with the reference to talks, which is the observable, and now I can get rid of all the dummy data. But it isn't working yet for a couple of reasons. Let's fix them one by one. So then you get to enjoy the virtue of looking at the console logs. So what do you have here? Error context, object, okay. Zoom in a bit. It's not saying anything too much useful here. This.talk service is undefined. Why is this? Because we're using injection, right? Well, not in this case, because the talks data source is being created manually in the component. Probably because the paginator and the sorting needs to be injected there. So we can just move it up a bit and say this.talk service, and then inject it here. Constructor, private talk service, talk service. Okay. And now we'll probably get another error, so let's just clear this out. It's actually working, but probably it breaks whenever I go here. Yeah, so now it's saying, no provider for talk service. When you want to inject a service, you need to tell Angular that it needs to be, well, defined in the list of services that can be injected. And this is, in my case, defined in the app module. If you have a large application, you would do this on a per module basis. So here I can say providers, talk service. And I also know that I need to import the HTTP client module. Otherwise, I can't perform HTTP calls. Okay. So now it's still crashing. Why is it crashing? Well, I know why. I'm not going to bother you with looking at the stack trace. Because actually the table component, the table data source, isn't really all the way asynchronous. Because what our friends at, I don't know, at the Angular Material team did is, okay, so you have an observable here, that's fine, but here we're directly accessing this.data, which used to be the dummy data. So I would have to rewrite this completely to get it to work in a completely reactive way. I'm going to take a little shortcut and saying the observable that I have here, pipe it to a map operation. And in the map operation, I'm saying data. Okay, I need to return the data, otherwise the map won't work. So this gets called whenever talk service.getTalks completes. So now I can say here this.data is data. This is completely wrong from if you want to build nice reactive applications. But I don't have time to make this nice, so we're going to do this quick and dirty. And then afterwards, I'm going to set the length of the paginator. So we're almost there. Let's see why we still have an error. I actually know the error because something is still going wrong here. And I believe this had it says this talk service.getTalks is not a function, which is strange. And when you think of what's happening, how can I fix this? The first thing you try, how many of you have watched the IT crowd, the series? So whenever you call support, what do they say? Hello IT, have you tried turning it off and on again? So let's do this. One of my colleagues usually says, ein kaltes Boot is immer gut. So rebooting it here. Because, well, I've had my CLI running for a while and been adding components and components and components, and somehow it sometimes screws up the injection. So now it's working, and now I have the same data table, but backed with data from the REST endpoint. It's not entirely working in the way it should, because I'm now fetching the data in one bulk. Well, what you actually should do is implement the getPagedData function so that you can do paging and only get like the first 10 records. In case JSpring grows so big that we have 1 billion talks, then we might need paging. So Well, we're doing good time-wise, 5 minutes left, should work. I am now going to commit this, connect to backend, but the speakers are still missing. So I want to add them in this table. So first let's go to the HTML and add a column for speakers. 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 Row dot speakers. Okay, it's reloading, but it's not showing anything yet because the columns for the table are defined in my displayed columns, which are fed in the HTML somewhere here, I guess. Yeah. So if I add it to displayed columns, speakers, then we should see the speakers appear as object. So does anyone has the name object in here? Guess not. Why is this? Because the speakers is an array. So we need to process this in our HTML template. So we have the row here, and now we're just saying row.speakers, but we need to do something else. So let's create a container. Container is like a meta object. You can use it to perform loops and stuff on, but it doesn't show in your HTML. So ng4, I'm going to do, sorry about that, I'm going to do a for loop. ng4 is let speaker of row.speakers. And then put the speaker in here. And then still says object, because the speaker is also an object. Sorry, I made a typo, row.speakers. Object, because the speaker is also an object. Speaker.name. And then we have them. And then we see here that they are going on the same line, because I'm just adding them together here. So we're going to solve this in a way that only Java developers that don't know CSS can do by just adding a line break. Don't tell anyone. Looks great, right? So let's commit these, add speakers. And now I want to make a production build of this, because it was all just running on in the development mode. And if I restart the ng-serve, then you'll see that this will go around 7 or 8 megabytes or something, because it's all uncompressed and unoptimized, and my entire node modules is in there. So the entire application is fairly large. Yeah, so it's altogether about 7 megabytes, I think. So now I'm going to start a production build, which will do all cool stuff like minimizing and whatever. So ng build prod min AOT, which means it does ahead of time compilation. So there's some compilation in terms of modules that you now do not have to do in the browser. So the app will also get a little faster. And this will create a dist folder, and in the dist folder there's a packaged and minimized version of the application. So any guesses on how big this will be? Below 1 megabyte or above? Below?
370 kilobytes.
Let's hope so. Well, I think, well, you're close. You're close. Let's go to the dist folder, and there's a demo app, and it's 800 kilobytes. So that's big. But it's probably because I'm pulling in a lot of stuff from material. So what I've now done is stuff like compiling the TypeScript, tree shaking, which means shaking your node modules so fast that all the unused components fly out, and doing some stuff like minification, getting them all together in single files, and timestamping these, so that when this is on a web server somewhere and you deploy a new version, somebody loads the application, the file name is changed, so you will automatically fetch it. So there's also an anti-caching mechanism. So now I have the HTML here. How I'm going to show this? No demo can be complete without using Docker, right? Because I said something about containers before. So I'm going to fire up a Docker container that mounts the current folder to user share nginx HTML inside the Docker container of nginx. So this will become the web root in my container. So now I can just go to localhost, and there we have the app. And I can also just open the dashboard, open the talks, this all keeps working. So this is kind of the production delivery. And if you see how this is loaded, then you'll see that it will only fetch a couple of files. Yeah, so this doesn't work, but I don't have time to explain that. The styles, the runtime, the polyfills, and then some stuff is cached because I fetched it before. So this is optimized for fast loading. So we have 10 seconds left, which is barely enough. But I think I'm done with the demo. So you can find all this on github.com/bertjan. And then there's an Angular for Java developers demo app. And there's also the Angular for Java developers demo backend, I believe, which is the Spring Boot application. And we are almost done, luckily, because it's time for drinks. So to recap, oh, actually, I have 2 minutes. Oh, wow, cool. Yeah, but I started. Oh, yeah, because I started early. Oh, we have all the time. Wait, this is exactly the 2 minutes that I started early. So to recap, it is component-based, it is modularized, and I now only have one app module, but typically you organize your components in modules and then have different modules per set of components. And these modules also support lazy loading. So your browser only starts loading a module until you start navigating to the route that is based on this module. There's dependency injection, which is, I think is pretty sweet. TypeScript, how many of you like TypeScript? Well, let me rephrase the question. How many of you like TypeScript better than JavaScript? Yes. rxjs, which is, well, it goes a bit too deep to explain all about rxjs, but the whole concept of observables and reactive programming is extremely powerful and really helps in terms of asynchronicity. So now I only need to do one HTTP call, but what if you need to do one HTTP call, get the result, fetch something out, and make another HTTP call, then do something else? Then it gets easy to stack all these calls together, get one observable out of it, and then use this observable to connect it to your data table, for example. It is a template engine with model binding. Well, that's what we saw, right? The binding to the variable in the component, stuff like ngIf, ng4 for templating. And has a powerful CLI, because I couldn't have done this without generating all the stuff that I did. Didn't type too much. So we have 5 seconds. No time for questions. Sorry about that. If you have questions, feel free to reach out on Twitter or during drinks afterwards. I have one question for you. Please take the time to rate this session to the Endtoend app. Be honest, but also be generous. Thank you for your time.